What kind of leader drops 100 tons of seeds from the sky during a drought? Not aid, not fertilizer, just seeds, carried by military helicopters, scattered like hope over a land of dust. In a country where the sun has scorched even memory, they called it madness. They said the birds would eat it. They said the wind would blow it away. But this wasn't about crops. This was about power. For decades, foreign donors decided who ate. Now, one African man said, "No more," Captain Ibrahim Traoré, while foreign press whispered reckless. He stood before his people and said, "If we die planted, but we will not beg again." They tried to bury us, but Traoré planted a nation instead. Stay with us because this isn't just another story. It's the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe and join us for an Africa that no longer bows its head. The Drop, Seeds Against Silence. The first whispers didn't come from the government. They came from the markets of Ouagadougou. Traders murmured of military helicopters flying low over the savannah. But not with soldiers, with crates, heavy, covered, sealed, and they flew not towards the borders, but inland, over cracked earth, over dying grass, over silence. The people thought it was another military drill, or some foreign aid gesture late, as always. But then, farmers walked their fields, and what they saw stopped them cold. Seeds, scattered by the thousands, maize, millet, peanuts, cassava, falling not in tidy rows, but across the land like defiant prayer. No announcement, no press conference, just dust and silence and seeds. Later, the truth emerged, one encrypted briefing at a time. President Ibrahim Traoré had ordered an aerial drop of 100 tons of grain seed across the most drought-stricken belts of Burkina Faso. It was one of the most audacious, untested agricultural acts in modern African history. His ministers were stunned. International agencies outraged. Western grain exporters terrified. Because this was no stunt. This was an assault on dependency, on decades of waiting for rice to come in sacks marked U.S. aid, on every whispered insult that said Africa can't feed itself. Captain Ibrahim latest news. The headline read, but what it didn't say was that this act wasn't about news. It was about history. The plan was built not just on courage, but calculation. Hidden in those crates were seed strains bred by African agronomists, quick germinating millet to attract grazers, deep-rooted cassava to hold soil, maize bred to resist drought, all matched zone by zone with climate data, migration patterns, and soil chemistry. This wasn't chaos. It was a symphony, written in green, played by wind, and conducted from the war room of a palace. In that room, Traoré looked over the country's rainfall maps, soil degradation reports, and whispered, "If the rains come, we will feed ourselves. If they don't, the roots will hold our soil and our hope until they do." And then he added, "We will stop begging for bread at someone else's table." The operation lasted 7 days. 7 days of sky buzzing with helicopters, carrying not war, but renewal. International donors were locked out. No logos, no contracts, no permission. That was the masterstroke. By doing it all with African resources, Traoré left foreign powers no foothold. By tying the act to both food and conservation, he made it untouchable politically and morally. But every revolution invites retaliation, and as the last crate fell, the first whisper of sabotage had already begun. Because in a world where hunger is a business, feeding yourself is an act of rebellion, and in Burkina Faso, the rebellion had just begun. The backlash. Foreign eyes, hidden hands. It didn't take long before the first sprouts even broke the soil, before the rains had even come. They were already calling it a disaster. Paris called it a reckless spectacle. London said it was destined to fail. Washington simply watched. But their grain lobbyists sharpened their knives. This wasn't just criticism. It was fear. Fear that Burkina Faso might succeed. Fear that Africa might feed itself. For decades, the continent's food systems were built on import dependency. Cheap wheat from Europe, subsidized rice from Asia, logos of aid agencies on every sack. But no one asked who grew it, or why local farms were left to die. Traoré had broken the script, and the reaction was swift. Within days, talking heads filled international media. Ecological risks, unregulated intervention, damage to fragile ecosystems. But behind the polite phrases was a brutal truth. If Burkina Faso became self-sufficient, billions would be lost by those who'd made starvation a business. Inside the country, the knives came out too. Opposition figures went on radio, whispering about black market seeds, expired stock, even genetically modified poisons funded by foreign experiments. It was theater, carefully scripted to make the people doubt what they saw with their own eyes. In Ouagadougou's cafes, old men shook their heads. Why not plant like our fathers did? In the provinces, some whispered, maybe the seeds were cursed. But Traoré expected this. What he didn't expect was fire. 12 nights after the drop, in the eastern province of Gorma, a warehouse holding surplus seed stock went up in flames, exploding into the night sky, filling the air not with hope, but with smoke. It wasn't a coincidence. Witnesses saw men with foreign accents fleeing towards the border. Military intelligence traced them to a European agribusiness group, recently banned from Burkina Faso's contracts. It was not just sabotage. It was a warning, and it confirmed what Traoré already knew. This was no longer about agriculture. This was war. In an emergency midnight session at the palace, maps were unrolled, rainfall projections updated, new drop zones marked, and a decision was made. Send in replacement seeds, this time under armed escort. But Traoré didn't stop there. Quiet envoys went to Niger, Mali, and Ghana, not just to explain, to invite, join us. The message read, African grain, African skies, African future. Because the best defense is a continent. It was bold, it was dangerous, and it turned one man's gamble into a pan-African front. From foreign boardrooms came the next phase. Covert agents posing as development consultants, NGO reports questioning the project's safety, bankers freezing loans, all without a single bullet fired. But bullets were coming, just not yet. For now, the attack was about trust, planting doubt like weeds, trying to convince a hungry people that feeding themselves was too risky. But on the ground, the land was already stirring. Something was coming, and even the silence of the soil began to tremble. The sprout, green shoots and ground truth. The 12th night after the drop was silent. Too silent. The skies were dry. The earth still cracked. Even Traoré's most loyal generals began to wonder if the gamble had failed. Foreign media pounced. Satellites beamed images of brown dust, barren fields, and failure. Traoré's folly. One headline in Paris sneered. Another called it populism disguised as policy. But in the countryside, the people were watching, not the news, but the clouds. And then, on the 13th night, they came. Dark, low clouds rolling from the northeast. Thunder without fury. And then rain. A soft, soaking rain that fell for hours. No lightning, no floods, just blessing. From the dusty borders of Mali to the lowlands near the Black Volta, water met seed, and silence gave way to whispers of green. At first, it was almost invisible, just threads, pale shoots barely piercing the surface, shy, uncertain, like children waking from sleep. But they multiplied, and they spread. In the Sahel, millet rose fast. Wide patches swayed in the breeze, drawing back herds of gazelle and wandering cattle. In the river valleys, cassava stretched its arms beneath the soil, its deep roots drinking hope. And in the west maize, tall, strong, defiant, stalks lifted to the sun as if to say, "We heard you." These were no miracles. They were design, mapped by satellites, engineered by agronomists. Each ecozone paired with specific strains. Each seed told where to live, when to rise, how to survive. And they did. Scientists from the National Agricultural Research Institute began whispering reports, germination rates exceeding 80% in drought conditions. With minimal irrigation, they encrypted the data, sent it to the palace. No press release, no celebration, just truth, quiet and unstoppable. In villages once abandoned, children ran barefoot through green, herders sang old songs again, and farmers wept not from hunger, but from surprise. But not all eyes smiled. In the east, another depot burned, a second warehouse of backup seeds gone. This time, no one fled, but footprints were found, and chemical residue on the walls. Military intelligence confirmed. Foreign hands again. Mercenaries linked to a multinational grain cartel. Cut off from Burkina Faso now, angry. The attack was brutal, but it confirmed something vital. Traoré's plan was working, and that terrified the world. At the palace, another war room session. New routes marked. Security doubled, and yet Traoré remained calm. If they burn seeds, he told his council, we will plant with our hands. If they burn hands, we will speak with our mouths, but we will not beg again. That week, aerial surveys showed fields swelling with green, villages thriving, markets stirring, and something deeper, confidence. For the first time in decades, Burkina Faso wasn't surviving. It was growing. If you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say Amen in the comments below. The war, poison, plots, and the price of independence. But every green field is a battlefield. As the stalks rose, so did the stakes. And in quiet rooms far from Africa, powerful men made new plans. Their instructions were simple. The harvest must not happen. Traoré's intelligence chief, Colonel Issoufou, intercepted the first message, an encrypted file from a private security network in Abidjan. No names, no faces, just intent. Stop it at the source. Then came the second wave. In Mali, a shipment of seed bags meant for the next phase was intercepted. At first glance, perfect, but lab tests showed the truth. The seeds had been chemically treated, not to grow, but to die. The poison was advanced, not available in West Africa, traced back to a European supplier, with historic ties to a grain cartel once dominant in the Sahel. Publicly, Traoré said nothing, but privately, he acted. Operation Iron Canopy was launched. Overnight, 14 so-called agriculture consultants were escorted from Burkina Faso's borders, their laptops and phones seized. Inside, wire transfers, contracts, emails to lobbyists in Europe. One phrase appeared more than once: delay the harvest or make it disappear. And so the front shifted. This was no longer a campaign, it was a war. The currency was no longer just grain, it was sovereignty. Development loans were frozen, gold exports delayed by compliance concerns. UN councils questioned the legality of aerial planting, but none mentioned starvation. Meanwhile, whispers spread of assassins. One foreign explosives expert slipped through the northern border, targeting the central grain hub at Kaya, the heart of the harvest. 40% of the nation's food stored there. Traoré's response, surgical. The grain was moved in silence under cover of dust storms, leaving behind sacks of sand and grass. When the saboteur struck, the skies lit with fire, and foreign media screamed of catastrophe. But the next morning, Traoré stood alive, smiling before the untouched reserves. Our enemies think in terms of destruction, he said. We think in terms of protection, and the nation exhaled. But the pressure kept mounting. Foreign agents posing as traders offered outrageous prices, tempting desperate farmers to smuggle yields across borders. Truck drivers were threatened. Irrigation channels were mapped for sabotage. Traoré convened his war council again, not in panic, but in preparation. We will not defend crops like they are fragile, he told his team. We will defend them like we defend the flag. And so was born Operation Harvest Shield. Before dawn, the convoys moved. Grain trucks under armored escort, special forces in plain clothes embedded in villages, irrigation channels rerouted through underground pipes planned months earlier. In Ouagadougou's markets, undercover agents posed as buyers, middlemen arrested, plots dismantled. One intercepted convoy claimed to carry cooking oil. Inside, industrial pesticides strong enough to poison thousands of hectares. In the west, a remote airstrip was discovered. Light aircraft prepared for a firebombing run on the maize belt. Stopped. Just in time. This was no longer about seeds. It was about who controls the future. And Traoré refused to blink. Captain Ibrahim's latest news trended again, but this time, the world was paying closer attention because something extraordinary was happening. Africa was feeding itself, and the world didn't know what to do. The harvest. And when the land fought back, the heat over the plains shimmered like glass. It was harvest season, but for President Traoré, it felt like walking a tightrope. stretched between triumph and annihilation. The fields rolled in gold, maize, heavy with promise, peanuts, rich and ripe, cassava, broad-leaved and bold. Villages once silent were alive with song, children laughing, fires burning again, this time for cooking. Not warning, but joy attracts danger. Foreign operatives moved quickly. One final push. Bribes offered to local officials to stall grain collection. Threats whispered to truck drivers, move the harvest, and your family may not see you again. Fake traders appeared in border towns, offering triple prices to smuggle crops out. Most alarming of all, a credible threat to poison the main irrigation channels. A chemical agent, airborne, meant to sterilize the soil for years. The goal was clear: prevent the proof, erase the evidence, make the harvest disappear before the world saw it. Traoré gathered his closest team in the underground command center. The air smelled of dust and coffee. Boots thudded on the concrete floor. The digital maps flickered. Red zones, green zones, and then the president spoke quietly, but with steel in his voice. This is no longer about agriculture. This is Africa's flag, and we will guard it. Operation Harvest Shield escalated. Convoys rerouted. Checkpoints fortified. Villages briefed. But then, Traoré did something unexpected. He appeared live on national television, not from the capital, but from Kaya, standing in the middle of the maize fields, flanked by farmers, soldiers, herders. Behind him, the crops swayed like a silent army, and he said, "This is not just Burkina Faso's harvest. This is Africa's harvest, and it will not be stolen." The broadcast was electric. From Bamako to Dar es Salaam, African media picked it up, and across Burkina Faso, something began to stir. Human walls, villagers, unarmed but unyielding, formed rings around the fields. Old men, mothers, youths, all guarding the grain. The message was clear: you will not take this from us. In the final hours, the enemy made its move. A decoy convoy carrying explosives was intercepted. A miscalculation. They struck an empty road. The real grain trucks already gone shielded by a dust storm that locals would later call the wind of the ancestors. By nightfall, the first trucks arrived at the central hub, their beds heavy with sacks, the air thick with the scent of maize. No press, no parade, just silence and victory. Foreign media grudgingly called it a logistical feat. In the villages, they called it the year the land fought back. And in the quiet of that night, Traoré walked between stacks of grain, lit by floodlights, guarded by young soldiers. He ran his hand across the sacks and knew this was no longer a gamble. This was the beginning. The beginning of a continent, no longer hungry, no longer waiting. Burkina Faso latest news trended for the right reasons. For the first time in decades, Burkina Faso had fed itself, and with it fed a new idea that Africa can rise without permission, without apology. He stood beneath the floodlights, the scent of fresh grain in the air, the echoes of harvest songs still rising from the villages. President Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier once trained for war, now surrounded by sacks of maize, millet, and hope. This was no grand ceremony, no medals, no orchestra, just a man walking among his people's survival. But this was more than food. This was memory reclaimed, destiny redrawn, Africa reimagined. For too long, the world told Africa what it could not do. They said, "You can't feed yourself. You can't resist aid. You can't survive without us." And then 100 tons of seeds fell from the sky, and Africa answered, "Watch us." This harvest was not just about Burkina Faso. It was not just about maize. It was not even about the Sahel. It was about a people remembering that independence means nothing without self-sufficiency. And Traoré knew they would come again, with sanctions, with sabotage, with smiling offers wrapped in chains. But now, Burkina Faso would meet them full, fed, rooted, ready. So let this be known: Captain Ibrahim's latest news is not a headline. It is a chapter, and Burkina Faso latest news is not a footnote. It is a future where Africa does not ask permission, but plants its own power. So to every elder who prayed for rain, to every farmer who waited, to every young voice rising across the continent, this is your victory. If this story moved something in your chest, don't scroll past. Like, share, speak, subscribe because they hid our history long enough. Let's speak our future out loud. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story, the kind they still don't want you to hear.